Cold billionaire CEO hires a surrogate, then falls deeply in love when he discovers her hidden secret talent. What would you do if someone saw the parts of you tried hardest to hide and loved you even more for it? He thought love was a distraction he couldn't afford. She just wanted a chance to change her life. When a cold billionaire hires a caramel-skinned woman as his surrogate, he expects nothing more than a business deal. But one accidental discovery, a hidden talent she tried to bury, shatters everything he thought he knew about love, trust, and second chances. Welcome back to the channel, my beautiful story family. Before we begin, I would be glad to know that these lessons get to people in different parts of the world, so please let me know where you're watching from. Thank you for being part of this growing family. And if you're ready for a story full of raw emotions, tension, twists, and redemption, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join this amazing growing family. You don't want to miss a second of this journey. Now, let's begin. The sleek, glass-walled office of Cross Enterprises loomed like a fortress of ice, reflecting the sharp edges of Holden Cross's world. At 42, he was a man carved from discipline, tall, broad-shouldered, with slate-gray eyes that seemed to dissect everything they touched. His dark suit was tailored to perfection, but it couldn't hide the tension in his jaw as he leaned back in his chair, staring at the city skyline. Love to him was a liability, a crack in the armor he'd spent decades forging. After 2 failed engagements, both women more enamored with his wealth than his soul, he'd sworn off emotional entanglements. But his legacy demanded an heir, and he'd be damned if the Cross name died with him. A surrogate was the answer, clean, contractual, no strings. The intercom buzzed, and his assistant's voice cut through the silence. "Mr. Cross, Ms. Monroe is here." "Send her in," he said, his tone clipped, betraying nothing. The door opened and Zariah Monroe stepped into the room, instantly disrupting its sterile calm. She was 30, with caramel skin that seemed to glow under the soft light, her dark curls pulled into a loose bun that hinted at effortless grace. Her navy dress was simple, professional, but it clung to her curves in a way that made Holden's gaze linger a beat too long. She carried herself with quiet confidence, though her eyes, deep brown, almost liquid, held a flicker of something guarded, something she wasn't sharing. "Miss Monroe," he said, standing, his voice cool as he gestured to the chair across his desk. "Sit." She did, crossing her legs with a small, deliberate smile. "Mr. Cross, I appreciate you considering me." He didn't return the smile. "This isn't about appreciation. It's about compatibility. You've read the terms?" Her fingers tightened briefly on the folder in her lap, but her expression didn't falter. "I have. 9 months, full medical care, a penthouse suite, and a payout that'll set me up for life. In exchange, I give you a child and walk away." "Exactly," he said, leaning forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "No emotional involvement, no complications. Can you handle that?" Zariah's smile tightened, but her voice was steady. "I'm here, aren't I? I know what I'm signing up for." He studied her, searching for cracks. She was too warm, too alive for this arrangement. Her presence felt like sunlight in a room meant for shadows, and it unsettled him. "Why do you need the money?" he asked, his tone almost accusatory. Her gaze didn't waver. "I have debts, medical bills from my mother's illness, and I want a fresh start. That's all you need to know." He raised an eyebrow, sensing there was more, but he let it go. "Fine. The agency says you're healthy, no criminal record, no red flags. But I need to hear it from you. Why should I choose you?" Zariah leaned forward slightly, her voice softening but firm. "Because I'm not here to play games. I'll follow your rules, give you what you want, and when it's done, I'll be gone. You won't find someone more committed to keeping this clean." Her words were perfect, but there was a spark in her eyes, a defiance that made his chest tighten. She wasn't just agreeing, she was challenging him to believe her. He didn't like it. It felt too personal, too human. "Very well," he said, sliding a contract across the desk. "Sign it. My lawyer will contact you with the next steps." She opened the folder, her fingers brushing the paper. For a moment she hesitated, her eyes scanning the pages. Then, with a quick glance at him, she picked up the pen and signed her name in bold, fluid strokes. But as she slid the contract back, she added, almost under her breath, "I do have one condition." He frowned, his patience thinning. "The terms are non-negotiable." "It's not for you," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "It's for me. I'm promising myself something. I won't lose who I am in this. Not again." The words hung between them, cryptic and heavy. Holden's jaw tightened. "This isn't about you, Ms. Monroe. It's about the child." Her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "I know, but I'm still me." He didn't respond, but her words echoed in his mind as she left the office, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. She was a means to an end, nothing more. So why did her presence linger like a question he couldn't answer? A week later, Zariah stood in the guest wing of Holden's Manhattan penthouse, her suitcase at her feet. The space was a masterpiece of modern design. White walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, furniture that looked more like art than something you'd sit on. It was beautiful, but it felt like a museum, not a home. She ran her fingers along the edge of a glass table, wondering how anyone could live in a place so devoid of warmth. "Everything to your satisfaction." Holden's voice came from behind her, sharp and detached. She turned, startled but masking it with a nod. "It's spacious." He stood in the doorway, his dark sweater and slacks somehow making him look even more imposing. "You'll have full access to the kitchen, gym, and medical suite. My staff will handle your needs. I expect you to follow the schedule, doctor's appointments, diet, rest. No deviations." Zariah raised an eyebrow, her tone light but edged. "You sound like you're briefing a soldier, not a woman carrying your child." His eyes narrowed. "This is a partnership, Ms. Monroe. I protect my investments." "Zariah," she corrected, stepping closer. "If I'm living here, you might as well use my name, unless you're afraid it'll make this too personal." He stiffened, caught off guard by her boldness. "Fine. Zariah. But don't mistake familiarity for friendship. We're not here to bond." She tilted her head, studying him. "Don't worry, Holden. I'm not looking for a friend, but you might want to unclench a little. It's going to be a long 9 months. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, amusement, irritation, or both. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual frost. "Dinner's at 7. Don't be late." As he walked away, Zariah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. He was cold, yes, but there was something else there. Something buried. She'd seen it in the way his gaze lingered on her, like he was trying to solve a puzzle he didn't want to admit existed. That night, Zariah sat across from Holden at a dining table that could have seated 20. The meal was exquisite. Seared salmon, roasted vegetables, a glass of sparkling water for her, but the silence was suffocating. She glanced at him, his focus on his plate, his movements precise, almost mechanical. "So," she said, breaking the quiet, "do you ever talk? Or is silence part of the billionaire mystique?" He looked up, his fork pausing mid-air. "What do you want to talk about?" She shrugged, leaning back in her chair. "Anything. Your day, your hobbies, whether you secretly binge rom-coms when no one's watching." His lips twitched, but he didn't smile. "I don't have time for hobbies. Or rom-coms." "Shocker," she said, her tone teasing. "Let me guess. You work, you brood, you repeat. Am I close?" He set his fork down, his gaze piercing. "You think you've got me figured out?" "Not yet," she admitted, meeting his stare. but I'm good at reading people, and you, Holden Cross, are lonelier than you let on." The words landed like a punch. His expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened around his glass. "You don't know me," he said, his voice low, almost dangerous. "Maybe not," she said softly. "But I know what it looks like when someone's built walls so high they can't see over them." He didn't respond, and the silence returned, heavier now. But as Zariah took a sip of her water, she noticed his eyes on her, studying her like she was a problem he couldn't solve. She didn't push further, but the tension between them crackled, a quiet promise of something neither could name. Late that night, Holden stood in his office, the city lights sprawling below. He couldn't sleep, his mind replaying Zariah's words. Lonely. He hated that she'd seen it, hated that it might be true. Crossing to the glass wall that separated his wing from hers, he stopped, his breath catching. Zariah was in her room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, a sketch pad in her lap. Her pencil moved with fluid grace, her face soft with focus. She was drawing, something she hadn't mentioned, something she clearly didn't want him to know. He watched, transfixed, as her hand created lines that seemed to pulse with life. It wasn't just skill, it was passion, raw and unguarded. For the first time, he saw her not as a contract, but as a woman with a world inside her he'd never expected. And it terrified him. What was she hiding? And why did it make him want to know her, really know her, when he'd sworn to keep her at arm's length? The question lingered unanswered as the days turned into weeks. Zariah settled into the penthouse, her presence a quiet disruption to Holden's carefully controlled life. Her laughter echoed in the halls, her humming filled the kitchen, and every time she spoke, he found himself listening too closely. He told himself it was curiosity, nothing more. But late at night, when he stood at that glass wall, watching her sketch in secret, he couldn't deny the pull. She was a risk he hadn't accounted for. And the contract, the one she'd signed with that cryptic condition, felt like a ticking clock, counting down to something he couldn't predict. Would you agree to be a surrogate for a billionaire if it meant changing your life forever? Comment your honest answer below. The penthouse was a labyrinth of glass and steel, but it was Zariah's quiet presence that kept pulling Holden off balance. Weeks had passed since she'd moved in, and her warmth, her laughter, her teasing jabs, had begun to seep into the cracks of his carefully guarded world. He hated it, or at least he told himself he did. Late at night, when he stood at the glass wall separating their wings, watching her sketch in secret, he felt a pull he couldn't name. Her drawings were alive, bursting with emotion she hid during the day, and every stroke of her pencil chipped away at his resolve to keep her at a distance. She was a puzzle, one he wasn't sure he wanted to solve. Tonight, though, he was exhausted. A brutal day of negotiations had left him raw, and all he wanted was the silence of his study and a glass of bourbon. He stepped off the private elevator, expecting the usual stillness of the penthouse. But as he crossed the foyer, a sound stopped him cold, a cascade of notes, rich and haunting, spilling from the private piano room at the far end of the hall. His chest tightened. That room was off limits, a space he hadn't touched in years, not since his mother's death. The grand piano, a relic of her memory, was meant to stay silent. He moved toward the sound, his footsteps soft but deliberate. The door was ajar, and through the sliver of light, he saw her. Zariah sat at the piano, her caramel skin glowing under the soft chandelier, her dark curls loose and tumbling over her shoulders. Her fingers danced across the keys, coaxing out a melody that was both fierce and tender, like a storm breaking over a quiet sea. Her eyes were closed, her face a map of raw emotion, joy, pain, longing. She was lost in it, completely unaware of him. For a moment, Holden couldn't move. The music was a language he didn't speak, but somehow understood, pulling at something buried deep inside him. She wasn't just playing. She was pouring her soul into the keys, and it was breathtaking. He'd seen her sketches, glimpsed her hidden passion, but this was something else. She was a prodigy, a musician who could make the air itself ache. The final note lingered, and Zariah's hands stilled. Her eyes fluttered open, and she froze, her gaze locking onto his. Her cheeks flushed, a mix of embarrassment and defiance. "You're not supposed to be here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Neither are you," Holden said, his voice rougher than he intended. He stepped into the room, the air thick with tension. "What the hell was that?" She stood, her hands fidgeting at her sides, but her chin lifted slightly. I didn't think anyone was home. I saw the piano and—" She stopped, biting her lip. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have touched it." "Don't apologize," he said, sharper than he meant. "Answer me. Where did you learn to play like that?" Zariah hesitated, her eyes searching his face as if weighing whether to trust him. "I taught myself," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "When I was a kid, my mom worked as a cleaner at a music school. I'd sneak in after hours, mess around on the pianos. It was my escape." He stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. An escape from what? Her gaze flickered, a shadow crossing her face. "From everything. My dad left when I was 5. Mom was sick a lot, even then. Music was the one place I could breathe." She paused, then added, almost to herself, "I stopped playing years ago. It hurt too much." "Why?" he asked, stepping closer, his voice low. "Why hide something like that?" She laughed, a small, bitter sound. "Because it doesn't pay the bills. Because dreams don't keep the lights on. I gave it up to survive, Holden. Not everyone gets to live for what they love." Her words hit him like a blade, slicing through the walls he'd built. He'd spent his life chasing control, power, legacy, burying anything that felt too human. But Zariah, she'd buried her heart to keep going, and yet here she was, breathing life into a room he'd left for dead. "You're not just good," he said, his voice quieter now, almost reverent. "You're extraordinary." Her eyes widened, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through her guard. "Don't say that," she murmured. "Don't make it mean more than it is." "Why not?" he pressed, closing the distance between them. He could feel the heat of her, the faint scent of her jasmine perfume. "You're carrying my child, Zariah. You live in my home. And you're hiding this gift. Why?" "Because it's mine," she said, her voice trembling but fierce. "It's the one thing no one can take from me. Not you, not your contract, not the world." The air crackled between them, charged with something neither could name. Holden's chest tightened, a mix of awe and frustration. He wanted to push her, to demand why she'd locked this part of herself away, but he also wanted to protect it, to protect her. It was a contradiction that made no sense, and it terrified him. "You should play," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion he didn't want to feel. "Not for me. For you." Her lips parted, but no words came. For a moment they just stood there, inches apart, the piano a silent witness to the shift between them. Then she stepped back, her guard snapping back into place. "I should go," she said, brushing past him. "Zariah," he called, stopping her at the door. She turned, her eyes wary. "Don't stop playing. Not because of me." She didn't answer, but the look in her eyes, gratitude, fear, something deeper, lingered as she disappeared down the hall. The next morning, Holden sat in his office, the memory of Zariah's music haunting him. He'd barely slept, her melody looping in his mind, stirring feelings he'd long buried. She wasn't just a surrogate anymore, not just a contract. She was a woman with a fire he hadn't expected, and it was unraveling him. He glanced at the contract on his desk, her signature bold and unyielding. That cryptic condition she'd mentioned, her promise to herself, felt like a key to something he didn't yet understand. What else was she hiding? And why did he care so much? In the kitchen, Zariah was pouring coffee, her movements deliberate as if she could sense his restlessness. "You're staring," she said without looking up, her tone light but guarded. "Am I?" he replied, leaning against the counter. "Maybe I'm trying to figure you out." She turned, her eyes meeting his, a challenge in them. "Good luck with that. I'm not an equation you can solve, Holden." "Maybe not," he said, his voice softer. "But I'm starting to think I want to try." Her breath caught, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just them. But the moment broke, and she stepped back, her smile tight. "Careful. You're breaking your own rules." As she walked away, Holden's gaze followed her, the question burning in his chest. What would happen if he let himself cross that line? And what secret was she still guarding, waiting to upend everything? The echo of Zariah's piano performance lingered in Holden's mind like a melody he couldn't shake. Days had passed since he'd caught her in the private piano room, her fingers weaving a spell that cracked something open inside him. He'd watched her walk away that night, her eyes a mix of defiance and vulnerability, and it had left him restless. She was more than a contract now, more than a means to an heir. She was Zariah, fierce, guarded, and carrying a gift that stirred feelings he'd sworn to bury. Her cryptic promise to herself, that condition she'd whispered about not losing who she was, gnawed at him. What else was she hiding? And why did he feel like he was teetering on the edge of something he couldn't control? In the kitchen that morning, her teasing challenge, "I'm not an equation you can solve, Holden," had hung in the air, a dare he wasn't sure he could resist. As she'd walked away, her jasmine scent trailing, he'd felt the rules of their arrangement bending under the weight of his curiosity. He told himself it was nothing, that he could keep this professional. But the truth was in the way his eyes followed her, in the way her music still hummed in his chest. A week later, Holden stood in the penthouse foyer, overseeing a delivery he'd orchestrated with surgical precision. A team of technicians moved carefully, tuning the grand piano in the private room. He'd told his staff it was routine maintenance, a lie that felt flimsier every time he repeated it. The truth was simpler and far more dangerous. He wanted Zariah to play again. Not for him, but for herself. He'd seen the way her face softened at the keys, the way her guard fell away. It was a glimpse of her soul, and he couldn't stop craving it. "Mr. Cross, the piano's in perfect condition now," the lead technician said, wiping his hands. "Anything else?" "No," Holden replied, his voice clipped. "That's all." As the team left, Holden lingered by the piano, his fingers brushing the polished wood. He imagined Zariah here, her curls falling loose, her hands dancing across the keys. The image sent a jolt through him, equal parts longing and frustration. He wasn't supposed to feel this way. She was a contract, a transaction. But the lie was crumbling. Over the next few days, he began leaving subtle invitations. A book of Chopin's nocturnes appeared on the kitchen counter, its pages dog-eared as if by accident. A single sheet of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata slipped onto the coffee table in her wing. He never mentioned them, never acknowledged the game he was playing, but he watched her, waiting for a sign she'd noticed. One evening, as they sat at the dining table, Zariah broke the silence, her voice teasing but sharp. "You're not subtle, you know." He looked up from his steak, his expression neutral. "What are you talking about?" She leaned forward, her brown eyes glinting. "The piano scores, Chopin in the kitchen, Beethoven in my room. What's next? Mozart in the bathroom?" He didn't flinch, but his pulse quickened. "I don't know what you mean. Maybe the staff misplaced some things." "Right," she said, her lips curving into a knowing smile. "And the piano just happened to get tuned out of nowhere. For house maintenance." He set his fork down, meeting her gaze. You're reading too much into it, Zariah. Am I? She challenged, her voice softening but laced with fire. Or are you trying to get me to play again? Why does it matter to you? The question hung between them, heavy and unguarded. He could have deflected, retreated to his usual cold detachment. But something in her eyes, curiosity, defiance, a flicker of hope, pulled the truth from him. Because I saw you that night, he said, his voice low. You weren't just playing. You were alive. I've never seen anything like it. Her breath caught, and for a moment she looked vulnerable, exposed. Then her guard snapped back. You don't get it, Holden. Music isn't something you can just summon because you're curious. It's not a toy. I'm not playing games, he said, leaning closer, his tone intense. You're hiding something that could light up the world. Why bury it? She laughed, sharp and bitter. Because the world doesn't care. You think talent pays the rent, feeds a family? I tried that life. I played in dive bars, taught kids who forgot me the second their lessons ended. It broke me. Money can't buy passion, Holden. It just buys survival. Her words hit like a slap, raw and unfiltered. He stared at her, seeing the pain she'd buried, the dreams she'd abandoned. You're wrong, he said, his voice quieter but firm. Money can't buy passion, but it can give you the freedom to chase it. You're here, Zariah. You've got that chance now. Why not take it? She shook her head, her eyes glistening. You think it's that simple. You think I can just open that door again and not get hurt. You don't know what it's like to lose something that feels like part of you. Maybe I do, he said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Her gaze sharpened, searching his face, but he didn't elaborate. He couldn't. The memory of his mother, her laughter, her music, was a wound he'd sealed shut years ago. The silence stretched, charged with unspoken truths. Finally, Zariah stood, her voice barely above a whisper. Stop leaving the scores, Holden. Let me decide what I want to keep buried. She walked away, leaving him alone with the weight of her words. But as he stared at the empty chair, he knew he couldn't stop. Not yet. The next morning, Zariah found another score, Debussy's Clair de Lune, tucked into her sketch pad. She sighed, half exasperated, half amused. Holden was relentless, his quiet persistence chipping away at her resolve. She didn't touch the piano, but she kept the score, folding it carefully into her bag. It felt like a dare, one she wasn't ready to accept. In the days that followed, their conversations grew sharper, laced with a strange intimacy. Over coffee, she'd challenge his worldview. You can't control everything, Holden, not even with all your billions. He'd fire back, his voice low and intense. Control's the only thing that keeps the world from falling apart. Each debate left them closer, their walls thinning, but neither acknowledged it. One night, as rain lashed the penthouse windows, Zariah found him in the piano room, staring at the keys. You're up late, she said, leaning against the doorframe. So are you, he replied, not turning. Couldn't sleep? Something like that. She stepped closer, her voice softening. Why do you keep pushing me to play? What's in it for you? He turned then, his gray eyes locking onto hers. Maybe I want to see what happens when you stop hiding. Maybe I want to know who you really are. Her heart thudded, the air between them electric. Careful, Holden, she whispered. You might not like what you find. Try me, he said, his voice a quiet challenge. She didn't answer, but as she left, her fingers brushed the piano keys, a single note ringing out. It was small, but it was enough to keep him hoping, and wondering what else she was holding back. Have you ever hidden a part of yourself because you were scared of judgment? What would you do if someone discovered your secret? Let's talk about it in the comments. The single note Zariah played on the piano lingered in Holden's mind like a promise. Her fleeting touch on the keys, that quiet defiance in her eyes as she'd whispered, "You might not like what you find," had shifted something between them. Their debates had grown sharper, their silences heavier with unspoken truths. The piano scores he left, Debussy, Bach, Satie, kept appearing, and though she hadn't played again, she stopped throwing them away. Each one she tucked into her sketchpad felt like a small victory, a crack in her armor. But it was her presence, her warmth, her fire that was dismantling his own walls, no matter how hard he fought it. He wasn't supposed to care. She was a contract, a means to an heir. Yet every time she challenged him, every time her laughter filled the penthouse, he felt himself slipping closer to a line he'd sworn never to cross. One rainy evening, as they stood in the kitchen, Zoraya held up a score of Rachmaninoff, her lips twitching with amusement. "You're relentless, you know that?" He leaned against the counter, his voice low. "You're stubborn. I'm just matching you." She laughed, soft and unguarded, and for a moment the world was just them. No contract, no rules. But the moment passed, and she retreated to her wing, leaving him with the ache of wanting more. 3 months into the pregnancy, everything changed. It was late, the penthouse dark except for the city lights filtering through the windows. Holden was in his study, reviewing contracts, when his phone buzzed. The hospital's number flashed on the screen, and his stomach dropped. "Mr. Cross," the doctor's voice was calm but urgent. "Miss Monroe was brought in an hour ago. She's stable now, but there were complications, some bleeding, possibly related to stress or the pregnancy's progression. We need you here." He was out the door before the call ended, his driver breaking every speed limit to get to the hospital. The sterile halls smelled of antiseptic, the fluorescent lights harsh against his frayed nerves. When he reached Zoraya's room, she was unconscious, an IV dripping into her arm, her face pale but peaceful. The doctor briefed him, placental concerns, bed rest, close monitoring. But all Holden could see was Zoraya, fragile in a way he hadn't imagined. Will she be okay?" he asked, his voice rough, betraying more than he intended. "We're optimistic," the doctor said. "She's strong. The baby's heartbeat is steady, but she needs rest and no stress." Holden nodded, barely hearing the rest. He pulled a chair to her bedside, his eyes fixed on her. Her curls spilled across the pillow, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. He'd never seen her so still, so vulnerable. The sight twisted something deep inside him, a fear he hadn't felt since his mother's final days. Without thinking, he reached for her hand, her skin warm against his. "You're going to be fine," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "You have to be." He stayed all night, the hospital's hum fading into the background. His thumb traced small circles on her hand, an anchor for them both. At some point, exhaustion won, and he drifted off, his head resting on the edge of her bed, their hands still entwined. Zoraya woke to the soft beep of monitors and the weight of something grounding her. Her eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the dim room. Then she saw him. Holden, slumped in the chair beside her, his dark hair mussed, his suit jacket draped over the armrest. His hand held hers, fingers loosely curled, as if he'd been afraid to let go even in sleep. Her chest tightened, a mix of confusion and warmth. He'd stayed, all night, for her. She shifted slightly, and his eyes snapped open, gray and intense. "Zoraya," he said, his voice hoarse. "You're awake." "What happened?" she asked, her throat dry. He straightened, but didn't release her hand. "You had some bleeding. The doctors caught it in time. You're okay now, but you need to take it easy. The baby's fine." Relief washed over her, but her gaze lingered on him. "You stayed here? All night?" He looked away, jaw tight. "I needed to know you were all right." "Why?" she pressed, her voice soft but searching. This is just a contract, right? His eyes met hers, and for a moment, the mask slipped. Don't ask questions you know the answer to. The words hung between them, raw and unguarded. She wanted to push, to unravel the truth in his gaze, but exhaustion pulled her back. "Thank you," she whispered, squeezing his hand. He nodded, his thumb brushing her knuckles before he let go. "Rest. I'll be here." The hospital released Zariah 2 days later, with strict orders for bed rest and weekly checkups. Holden rearranged his schedule, delegating meetings to his team, a move that raised eyebrows among his staff. But he didn't care. Something had shifted that night in the hospital, a quiet admission he couldn't voice. Zariah wasn't just carrying his child, she was becoming something he couldn't define, something he wasn't ready to lose. The first change was subtle but unmistakable. Instead of sending his driver, Holden began taking Zariah to her doctor's appointments himself. The first time, she raised an eyebrow as he opened the car door for her. "What's this? Billionaire chauffeur service now?" He smirked, sliding into the driver's seat. "Don't get used to it. I just don't trust anyone else to get you there on time." "Uh-huh," she said, her tone teasing but her eyes soft. "Admit it. You're going soft." "Never," he shot back, but the corner of his mouth twitched, betraying him. The drives became their new routine, a space where their guards lowered just enough. They'd talk about her sketches, his childhood summers in Maine, the way she craved mangoes at midnight. One afternoon, as they waited at a stoplight, she turned to him, her voice quiet. "You didn't have to stay at the hospital, you know, but it meant something." He kept his eyes on the road, his grip tightening on the wheel. "You scared the hell out of me, Zariah. I wasn't going to leave you alone." She didn't respond, but her hand rested lightly on his arm, a touch that lingered longer than it should have. The air between them hummed, a connection neither could name but both felt. Back at the penthouse, Holden found another score, Liszt's Liebestraum, slipped under her door. She hadn't played since the hospital, but she kept the scores, stacking them neatly in her room. He didn't push, but he watched her, waiting for the moment she'd let herself shine again. And with every drive, every quiet moment, he wondered what else she was holding back, and what it would cost him to find out. The drives to Zariah's doctor's appointments had become a quiet ritual, a pocket of time where Holden and Zariah let their guards slip. Her teasing, "Billionaire chauffeur service now?" still echoed in his mind, as did the warmth of her hand on his arm, a touch that lingered like a question. Since her hospital scare, Holden had felt a shift, a pull toward her he couldn't ignore. The piano scores he left, Liszt, Schubert, kept piling up in her room, untouched but not discarded, a silent acknowledgement of their strange connection. Every glance, every shared laugh in the car deepened the tension, a current neither dared name. But the memory of her hand in his at the hospital, her whispered "thank you," haunted him. She was no longer just the woman carrying his child. She was Zariah, and she was unraveling him. 6 months into the pregnancy, the penthouse felt less like a fortress and more like a home, though Holden would never admit it. Zariah's presence, her humming in the kitchen, her sketches scattered on the coffee table, had softened its edges. He was in his study, reviewing a merger, when the intercom buzzed, his assistant's voice tight. "Mr. Cross, Ms. Walsh is here. She insists on seeing you." Holden's jaw clenched. Genevieve Walsh, his ex-fiancée, the woman who'd left him 2 years ago when she realized his heart wasn't hers to claim. He hadn't seen her since, hadn't wanted to. "Tell her I'm busy," he said, his tone ice. "She says it's urgent," the assistant pressed. "She's already in the lobby." He cursed under his breath. "Fine. Send her up." Minutes later, the elevator doors slid open, and Genevieve stepped into the penthouse like she still owned it. She was all sharp angles, blonde hair sleek, emerald eyes calculating, her designer coat draped over a crimson dress. "Holden," she purred, her smile practiced. "You're a hard man to track down." "What do you want, Genevieve?" he asked, standing but not moving toward her. His voice was cold, a wall between them. She tilted her head, unfazed. "Can't an old friend check in? I heard rumors you're expanding the family. I had to see for myself." His eyes narrowed. "My life's none of your business anymore." Before she could reply, a soft sound came from the hallway. Zariah appeared, her hand resting on her rounded belly, her loose sweater and jeans a stark contrast to Genevieve's polished elegance. Her caramel skin glowed under the soft light, but her expression was guarded as she took in the scene. Genevieve's gaze flicked to Zariah, her smile turning sharp. "Oh my, trading artists for heirs now, Holden. How quaint." Her tone dripped with condescension, her eyes raking over Zariah's casual clothes, her curls pulled into a messy bun. "What's this one's story? Struggling painter? Starving musician? Or just another girl dazzled by your bank account?" Zariah stiffened, her lips parting, but Holden stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Enough, Genevieve. You don't know her, and you don't get to talk about her like that." Genevieve raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Defensive, are we?" "That's new. She must be special. She's more than you'll ever understand," he said, his words sharp, unyielding. "Zariah's not here for my money. She's here because she's strong enough to do what you never could. Commit to something real." The air crackled, the weight of his words hanging heavy. Zariah's eyes widened, her breath catching. Genevieve's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly, tossing her hair. "Charming. But let's be honest, Holden. You don't do real. You do control. And this?" She gestured to Zariah, her voice mocking. "This is just another project you'll tire of." "Get out," Holden said, his voice deadly calm. "Now." Genevieve smirked, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you." She sauntered to the elevator, her heels clicking, and was gone. Silence descended, thick and charged. Holden turned to Zariah, who stood frozen, her expression unreadable. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "Defend me." "Yes, I did," he said, stepping closer, his gray eyes intense. "She had no right to speak to you that way. No one does." Zariah looked away, her fingers tightening on the edge of her sweater. "Why does it matter to you? I'm just the surrogate, right?" He flinched, her words cutting deeper than he expected. "You know that's not true," he said, his voice rough. "Not anymore." Her gaze snapped back to his, searching, questioning. For a moment they stood inches apart, the unspoken pulling them closer. But she stepped back, her voice barely a whisper. "I need some air." She turned and headed to her wing, leaving Holden staring after her, his chest tight with something he couldn't name. Zariah closed her bedroom door, her heart pounding. She sank onto the bed, replaying Holden's words. "She's more than you'll ever understand." He defended her, not out of obligation, but with a fierceness that felt personal, intimate. It wasn't just about the contract anymore, and that terrified her. She'd spent months guarding herself, keeping her music, her heart, locked away. But Holden saw her, really saw her, and it was unraveling everything. She glanced at the stack of piano scores on her nightstand, the latest a piece by Ravel. He hadn't stopped leaving them, hadn't stopped believing in her gift. And now, standing up to Genevieve, he'd shown her a side of him she hadn't expected, protective, raw, human. Her hand rested on her belly, the baby's gentle kick grounding her. She'd signed the contract to change her life, not to lose her heart. But as she sat there, his voice echoing in her mind, she wondered if she was falling for him. and what it would cost her to admit it. The next morning, Holden found Zariah in the kitchen, sipping tea, her eyes distant. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. She nodded, but her smile was tight. "Just processing. Your ex is intense." "She's irrelevant," he said, leaning against the counter. "Forget her." "Hard to when she's throwing shade like that," Zariah said, her tone light but her eyes searching. "You didn't have to say what you did." "About me." He held her gaze unflinching. "I meant every word." Her breath hitched, and for a moment the air between them hummed with possibility. But the weight of Genevieve's visit, the questions it raised, lingered. Zariah looked away, her voice quiet. "I need time, Holden." He nodded, respecting her space, but as he left for his office, he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming, a truth neither of them was ready to face. And Zariah, alone with her thoughts, wondered if the secret she'd buried, the one tied to her music and her past, was about to change everything. The sting of Genevieve's visit lingered, but it was Holden's fierce defense. "She's more than you'll ever understand," that kept Zariah awake at night. His words had cracked her carefully built walls, stirring feelings she'd fought to suppress. The drives to her appointments, his quiet insistence on leaving piano scores, the way his hand had held hers in the hospital, all of it wove a connection she couldn't deny. Yet, her question, "I'm just the surrogate, right?" And his raw response, "You know that's not true," hung between them, unanswered. She was falling for him, and the realization terrified her. Her hand rested on her growing belly, the baby's kicks a reminder of the contract that bound them. She'd promised herself she wouldn't lose who she was, but her heart was slipping, and she wasn't sure she could stop it. 7 months into the pregnancy, the penthouse was a fragile balance of unspoken truths. Zariah's sketches filled the common areas, her presence softening the sterile space, but the tension between her and Holden simmered. She hadn't played the piano again, though the stack of scores, now including Tchaikovsky and Debussy, grew taller. Each one felt like a plea from him, a quiet hope she'd let her guard down. But fear held her back. If she played, if she let him in fully, what would be left of her when this was over? One evening, as she headed to the kitchen for tea, she overheard voices from Holden's study. The door was slightly ajar, and she froze at the sound of his voice, low and firm. "I won't need her around after the birth," he said. "The contract is clear. She'll be compensated and gone. That's the deal." Her heart stopped. The words hit like a blade, cold and precise. She pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a gasp as his lawyer's voice responded, too muffled to make out. But Holden's words were enough. Gone. After everything, the hospital, the drives, his defense against Genevieve, she was still just a transaction, a means to an heir. The warmth she'd felt, the connection she'd dared to believe in, crumbled to ash. She slipped back to her wing, her chest tight with betrayal. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She'd been a fool to think he saw her as more than a contract. Her mind raced, replaying every moment, his hand on hers, his quiet smiles in the car. Had it all been a lie? Or had she misread him, letting her heart see what wasn't there? Either way, the pain was real, and it cut deeper than she'd expected. In her room, Zariah sank onto the bed, her hand resting on her belly. The baby kicked, a small anchor in the storm of her thoughts. She'd signed the contract to change her life, to pay off her debts and start fresh. But she hadn't planned on falling for Holden, on hoping for something more. Now his words confirmed her worst fear. She was disposable. Once the baby was born, he'd move on, and she'd be left with nothing but a payout and a broken heart. She made a decision then, cold and resolute. She'd fulfill the contract, deliver the baby, and disappear. No goodbyes, no explanations. She'd vanished to a new city, a new life, where she could rebuild without the weight of his rejection. The thought hurt, but it was survival, and she'd survived worse. Late that night, unable to sleep, Zariah sat at her desk, a blank sheet of paper before her. Her emotions churned, anger, hurt, and something softer, something she couldn't shake. She picked up a pen, her hand trembling, and began to write. The words poured out, raw and unfiltered, a letter to Holden she knew she'd never give him. Holden, I heard you tonight. I know I was never meant to stay, but I need you to know the truth, even if you never read this. This baby isn't just yours. It's a part of me, too. Every kick, every moment has tied me to them in ways I didn't expect. And you, I thought I saw something in you, something real. I was wrong. I fell for you, Holden. For the man who stayed by my bedside, who left piano scores like they were love letters. But I'm just a contract to you, and that's a truth I can't unhear. My music, my heart, the parts of me I hid, they were safe until you saw them. Now I'm leaving, not because I want to, but because I have to. I won't let you break me, but I'll always wonder what could have been if you'd meant what you said. Zariah. She folded the letter, her tears smudging the ink, and tucked it into her sketch pad, hidden among the scores. It was her truth, her closure, but she'd never let him see it. He didn't deserve it. The next morning, Zariah moved through the penthouse like a ghost, her smiles forced, her words clipped. Holden noticed the change, his brow furrowing as she avoided his gaze over breakfast. "You're quiet," he said, setting down his coffee. "Everything okay?" "Fine," she said, her voice flat. "Just tired." He studied her, sensing the distance but not understanding it. "If something's wrong, tell me. The baby's fine," she cut in, sharper than intended. "I've got an appointment tomorrow. I'll handle it." His eyes narrowed, but he didn't push. "I'll drive you." "No," she said quickly. "I'll take the driver. You're busy." The rejection stung, but he nodded, his jaw tight. "All right, but I'm here, Zariah. You know that." She looked away, her throat burning. "You won't need me around after the birth." His words echoed, a barrier she couldn't breach. She excused herself, retreating to her wing, her resolve hardening. 2 more months, and she'd be gone. Holden sensed the shift, a coldness in Zariah he couldn't place. She was pulling away, her warmth replaced by a wall he didn't know how to climb. He replayed their recent moments, the drives, the laughter, but found no answers. In his study, he stared at the latest piano score he'd planned to leave, Chopin's Ballade No. 1, and set it aside. Something was wrong, and he needed to know what. As Zariah planned her escape, the letter in her sketchpad weighed heavy, a secret she'd take with her. But the truth, her feelings, the baby's place in her heart, was a spark that could still ignite. What would happen if Holden found it? And what was he hiding in the words she'd overheard that might change everything? The penthouse had become a battlefield of silence since Zariah overheard Holden's words to his lawyer. "I won't need her around after the birth." The betrayal cut deep, severing the fragile trust she'd built. His defense against Genevieve, the hospital nights, the piano scores, all felt like lies now, a cruel illusion of care. Zariah's decision to disappear after the baby's birth hardened into a shield, protecting her from the ache of loving him. The letter she'd written, tucked away in her sketchpad, was her unspoken truth, a confession of her feelings and the baby's place in her heart. She'd never give it to him, but its weight anchored her as she counted down the days. Her smiles were forced, her words curt, and though Holden noticed the distance, his attempts to bridge it, "I'm here, Zariah," only deepened her resolve. 2 months left and she'd be gone, leaving behind the man who'd made her believe in more. 9 months into the pregnancy, the air in the penthouse was thick with tension. Zariah's belly was round, her movements slower, but her determination to protect herself was unwavering. She avoided Holden's gaze at breakfast, her responses to his questions about her health, the baby, anything, clipped and cold. He'd stopped leaving piano scores, sensing her withdrawal, but his quiet concern lingered in the way he watched her, his gray eyes searching for answers she wouldn't give. She booked her own driver for appointments, refusing his offers to drive, each rejection a brick in the wall between them. Yet, despite her resolve, her heart ached. The baby's kicks, the sketches she still drew, the music she refused to play, all tied her to Holden in ways she couldn't escape. Late one evening, as rain battered the penthouse windows, Zariah felt a sharp pain low in her abdomen. She gasped, gripping the kitchen counter, her tea mug slipping from her hand and shattering on the floor. The pain came again, fiercer, and she doubled over, fear spiking through her. "No," she whispered, her hand on her belly. "Not yet." Holden appeared in the doorway, alerted by the crash. "Zariah!" His voice was sharp with alarm as he crossed the room in 3 strides. "What's wrong?" "It hurts," she managed, her breath shallow. "Something's not right." His face paled, but he moved with precision, grabbing his phone and calling his driver while supporting her with one arm. "We're going to the hospital. Now can you walk?" She nodded, clutching his arm as another pain ripped through her. He guided her to the elevator, his touch steady despite the panic in his eyes. The drive to the hospital was a blur of rain-streaked windows and Zariah's labored breathing. Holden held her hand, his voice low and urgent. "Stay with me, Zariah. You're going to be okay." At the hospital, the emergency room was a whirlwind of white coats and beeping monitors. Zariah was wheeled into triage, her vision blurring as the pain intensified. The doctor's voice cut through the haze. "Fetal distress, possible placental abruption. We need to prep for an emergency C-section." Zariah's heart raced, fear for the baby overwhelming her own pain. She reached for Holden, her voice trembling. "The baby. Please make sure." "They will," he said, his hand tightening around hers. "I'm right here." But as they moved her to the operating room, Holden was stopped at the door, his face a mask of barely controlled fear. "Sir, you'll need to wait here," a nurse said, her tone firm. "No," he growled, his voice raw. "She needs me." Zariah caught his gaze, her eyes wide with fear and something softer. Regret, maybe, for the distance she'd built. "Holden," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm scared." He leaned close, ignoring the nurse, his forehead nearly touching hers. "Don't you dare leave me," he whispered, his voice fierce, almost desperate. "You're stronger than this. You hear me?" She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks as they wheeled her away. Holden stood frozen, his hands clenched, the weight of his words crashing over him. "Don't leave me." He hadn't meant to say it, hadn't meant to let the truth slip. He was terrified, not just for the baby, but for her. Zariah with her fire, her music, her heart. Losing her would break him in ways he hadn't known were possible. In the waiting room, time stretched into an agonizing eternity. Holden paced, his suit rumpled, his mind replaying every moment with Zariah. Her laughter in the car, her sketches, the way she'd played the piano that night, pouring her soul into the keys. He'd told his lawyer he wouldn't need her after the birth, a cold calculation to protect himself from the feelings she stirred. But it was a lie, one he hadn't admitted until now. He needed her, not as a surrogate, but as Zariah, the woman who'd cracked his world open. A doctor emerged, her expression calm but serious. "Mr. Cross, the surgery went well. Miss Monroe is stable, and you have a healthy daughter. Relief hit him like a tidal wave, but it was tempered by one question. "Zariah, can I see her?" "She's in recovery," the doctor said. "She's weak but awake. You can go in shortly." Holden nodded, his throat tight. A daughter. He hadn't expected the rush of emotion, the pride, the fear, the love. But it was Zariah he needed to see, to know she was truly okay. In the recovery room, Zariah lay pale against the white sheets, an IV dripping into her arm. Her eyes fluttered open as Holden entered, his presence filling the small space. He pulled a chair to her bedside, his movements careful, as if she might break. "You're here," she said, her voice hoarse but warm. "Where else would I be?" he replied, his tone softer than she'd ever heard. He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "You scared the hell out of me." She managed a weak smile. "Sorry. Didn't mean to." He didn't smile back, his eyes locked on hers, raw with something she couldn't name. "The baby. She's perfect. A girl." Zariah's breath caught, tears welling. "A girl," she whispered, her hand resting on her now empty belly. "Is she... Can I see her?" "Soon," he said. "They're checking her over, but she's strong, like her mother." Her heart ached at his words, the tenderness clashing with the memory of his betrayal. "I won't need her around after the birth." She wanted to believe he cared, but the wound was still raw. "Holden," she started, her voice trembling. Not now," he cut in gently. "Rest. We'll talk later." She nodded, too exhausted to argue. As she drifted back to sleep, his hand stayed in hers, a quiet promise she wasn't sure she could trust. Hours later, Zariah held her daughter for the first time. The baby was tiny, with caramel skin and a tuft of dark curls, her eyes blinking up at Zariah with quiet curiosity. "Hey, little one," Zariah whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm your mom. For now." The words broke her. The contract loomed, a ticking clock. She'd planned to disappear, to leave this life behind, but holding her daughter, feeling the weight of her tiny body, she wavered. Could she walk away from this? From her? From Holden, despite everything? Holden watched from the doorway, his chest tight. Zariah's love for the baby was palpable, a mirror of the fire he'd seen in her music, her sketches. He'd almost lost her today, and the thought was unbearable. He wanted to tell her the truth, about his words to the lawyer, about the feelings he'd fought for months. But the distance she'd built, the coldness in her eyes, held him back. What had he done to make her pull away? And how could he fix it before it was too late? Back at the penthouse, Zariah recovered slowly, her strength returning as she cared for her daughter, whom they named Lila. Holden was there every step, changing diapers, bringing her tea, his presence a constant she couldn't ignore. But the letter in her sketchpad weighed heavy, its words a secret she clung to. She hadn't given it to him, hadn't planned to. But every time he looked at her, his eyes soft, pleading, she wondered if she'd misjudged him. One night, as Lila slept, Zariah found a new score on her nightstand, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. A note was tucked inside in Holden's sharp handwriting. "Play again. For you. For her." Her heart twisted. He was still trying, still seeing her. But the memory of his words, "I won't need her around," kept her guarded. She tucked the score away, her plan to leave unchanged. Yet, as Holden watched her with Lila, a quiet hope grew. He didn't know about the letter, about her plan to vanish, but he sensed her distance, and it terrified him. What truth was she hiding? And what would it take to make her stay, not for the contract, but for him? The birth of Lila had reshaped the penthouse, filling it with soft cries and the warmth of new life. Zariah's recovery was slow, but her love for her daughter shone in every quiet moment, rocking Lila, humming lullabies, sketching her tiny face. Holden was a constant presence, his tenderness undeniable as he changed diapers and brought Zariah tea. Yet the letter she'd written, hidden in her sketch pad, confessing her love and her plan to disappear, remained a silent wedge. His note with Chopin's Nocturne, urging her to play for herself and Lila, had stirred her heart, but his words to his lawyer, "I won't need her around after the birth," kept her guarded. She clung to her plan to leave, believing she was just a contract, even as her feelings for Holden and Lila begged her to stay. 2 weeks after Lila's birth, Zariah agreed to perform a private piano concert at a small Manhattan hall, a final act before vanishing. She'd been approached by a local music director, moved by rumors of her talent, and though she hesitated, the pull to play one last time was too strong. It was her goodbye, to her music, to Holden, to the life she'd almost let herself want. Holden, meanwhile, was in the nursery, tidying while Lila napped. Zariah was out, meeting with the concert organizer, and the quiet gave him a moment to think. He missed her warmth, the way she'd once teased him in the car. Her distance since the hospital gnawed at him, a puzzle he couldn't solve. As he straightened a stack of books on the shelf, Zariah's sketch pad slipped to the floor, spilling its contents, piano scores and a folded letter. Curiosity won over caution. He opened the letter, his heart stopping as he read her words. "I fell for you, Holden. I'm leaving, not because I want to, but because I have to." She'd overheard him, misunderstood his cold words to his lawyer as rejection. She thought she was unwanted, disposable. The truth hit like a punch. He'd pushed her away not with his heart, but with his fear of losing control. And now she was planning to disappear. Panic surged. He had to find her, to explain. His phone buzzed, a message from his assistant about Zariah's concert that evening. She was performing and then she'd be gone. He grabbed his coat, leaving Lila with the nanny, and raced to the concert hall. The hall was intimate, its lights dim as Zariah sat at the grand piano, her fingers trembling. The small audience, music patrons, a few friends of the director, waited in hushed anticipation. She wore a simple black dress, her caramel skin glowing, her curls loose. This was her farewell, a chance to reclaim her music before starting over. As she began Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the piece Holden had left, she poured her heart into the keys, her love, her pain, her goodbye. Holden slipped in, standing at the back, his chest tight. Her music was a revelation, raw and luminous, every note a piece of her soul. He saw her now, fully, the woman who'd carried his child, who'd challenged him, who'd loved him despite his walls. And he'd almost lost her. As the final note faded, the audience applauded, but Zariah's eyes were distant, already planning her escape. She stood, bowing quickly, and headed for the side exit. Holden moved fast, catching her in the hallway, his voice urgent. "Zariah, wait!" She froze, her eyes wide with shock and fear. "Holden, what are you—" "I found your letter," he said, stepping closer, his voice raw. "You think I don't want you? You're wrong." Her breath hitched, but her guard was up. "I heard you. You said you wouldn't need me after the birth." "I was scared," he admitted, his eyes pleading. "I thought keeping you at a distance would protect me, but I need you, Zariah. Not just for Lila. For me." Tears welled in her eyes, her voice trembling. "I can't trust you, Holden. Not after that." "Then let me prove it," he said, his hand reaching for hers. "Don't leave. Stay. For Lila. For us." She hesitated, the weight of his words clashing with her fear. The concert hall hummed with distant applause, a reminder of the music she'd reclaimed. Could she reclaim him too? Do you believe in second chances even when trust is broken? Share your thoughts with us. Your words might inspire someone today. Zariah stood in the dimly lit hallway of the concert hall, Holden's words. I need you, Zariah, for me, ringing in her ears. Her letter, her plan to disappear, had been laid bare, and his confession shattered her resolve. The pain of his overheard words, "I won't need her around," clashed with the raw sincerity in his eyes. She wanted to believe him, to trust the man who'd stayed by her hospital bed, who'd left piano scores like quiet pleas. But fear held her back, the weight of her planned escape pulling her toward the exit. The distant applause from her performance, Chopin's Nocturne, echoed, a reminder of the music she'd reclaimed. Could she reclaim him too? She stepped back, her voice trembling. "I need time, Holden." He nodded, pain flickering in his gray eyes, but he let her go, watching as she slipped back into the hall for her final piece. The stage lights warmed Zariah's skin as she returned to the piano, the small audience still buzzing from her first performance. She'd agreed to one more piece, Debussy's Clair de Lune, before vanishing into a new life. Her fingers hovered over the keys, her heart torn between the music and Holden's plea. As the first notes flowed, soft and luminous, she lost herself in the melody, pouring her love for Lila, her pain, her unspoken feelings for Holden into every chord. The music was her truth, her farewell and her strength. Halfway through, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Zariah's eyes flicked up, and her breath caught. Holden was walking down the aisle, his suit slightly rumpled, his face a mix of determination and vulnerability. The audience stirred, confused, but he didn't stop, climbing the stage steps with purpose. She faltered, the notes trailing off, her hands frozen. "Holden, what?" He raised a hand, his voice steady but urgent. "Let me say this, please." The hall fell silent, every eye on them. He turned to the crowd, then back to her, his gaze unwavering. "Zariah, you taught me to feel again. I didn't hire you to love you. I hired you for a contract, a cold deal I thought I could control. But you became the music I can't live without." Her heart pounded, tears prickling her eyes. The crowd was a blur, the world narrowing to just him. He stepped closer, pulling something from his pocket. A set of piano keys, not real but symbolic, tied with a golden ribbon. He held them out, his voice dropping to a raw whisper. "I was a fool. I pushed you away because I was scared of this, of you. But I love you, Zariah. I love Lila, and I want you both, forever. Come home, our home." The words hit like a wave, washing away her doubts. The keys in his hand, the ribbon glinting, were more than a gesture. They were a promise tying her music to his heart. She stood, her legs shaky, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You mean it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "After everything." "Every word," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "I don't have a ring. I don't need one. I just need you." The crowd erupted in applause, but Zariah barely heard it. She stepped forward, her hand brushing the keys, then his. "I was going to leave," she admitted, her voice thick. "I thought you didn't want me." "I'll spend my life proving I do," he said, pulling her close. "Starting now." She laughed through her tears, nodding. "Okay. Our home." He kissed her then, soft but fierce, the piano keys pressed between them. The crowd cheered, but for Zariah it was just them, Holden, Lila, and the music that had brought them together. She'd come to change her life, but she'd found so much more. As they left the stage, hand in hand, Zariah glanced at the piano, her heart full. The letter in her sketch pad didn't matter anymore. She'd told him her truth, not in words, but in music, and he'd answered with his own. They were home, and she'd never have to hide again. The concert hall moment, Holden's confession, the piano keys tied with a golden ribbon, and Zariah's tearful, "Okay, our home," marked the beginning of a new chapter. His kiss, fierce yet tender, had sealed a promise that dissolved her fears. Zariah had stepped off the stage, hand in hand with Holden, no longer planning to disappear. The letter in her sketchpad, once heavy with her pain, was forgotten, replaced by the truth they'd spoken in that electric moment. She'd found not just a home, but a love she'd never dared to dream of. And with Lila, they were a family. 2 years later, Zariah stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, her fingers flexing, nerves humming. Her black gown shimmered under the lights, her caramel skin glowing with quiet confidence. She was no longer the struggling artist who'd buried her talent. She was Zariah Monroe, a renowned pianist, her name on marquees across the city. Holden had been her fiercest supporter, funding her first recital, connecting her with mentors, and cheering louder than anyone at every performance. He never pushed, only believed, and it had reignited her passion. Tonight's concert was sold out, her rendition of Chopin and Debussy already earning rave reviews. As she stepped onto the stage, the applause roared, but her eyes found them, Holden and 3-year-old Lila, front row, as always. Lila's curls bounced as she waved, her tiny hand clutching a toy piano. Holden's gray eyes sparkled with pride, his smile soft but unwavering. Zariah's heart swelled. They were her anchor, her muse. She played, her music soaring, each note a piece of her journey, from survival to love, from silence to song. The audience was captivated, but it was Lila's giggle and Holden's quiet clap that mattered most. Months later, on a quiet spring evening, Zariah and Holden married in a small garden ceremony. No lavish affair, just close friends, soft music, and Lila scattering petals. Zariah wore a simple white dress, Holden a tailored suit, their vows whispered with raw honesty. "You gave me back my music," she said, tears in her eyes. "You gave me you," he replied, his voice thick. They kissed as Lila clapped, the golden ribbon from the piano keys woven into Zariah's bouquet, a nod to the moment that changed everything. Years passed, and their life bloomed. Zariah's career soared, her concerts a blend of technical brilliance and raw emotion. Lila grew, her mother's spark in her eyes, often tinkering on a child's piano during rehearsals. At every performance, she sat front row with Holden, her tiny hands mimicking Zariah's movements. Holden, once cold and detached, was now the heart of their home, building a legacy not of wealth, but of love. As Zariah played her final note at a Lincoln Center concert, the crowd rose, but she looked to her family. Lila waved, Holden mouthed, "I love you." She'd come to change her life, but found a symphony instead, one she'd play forever.